Um,
Mhm.
okay. Um, I'm going to ask questions. I'll put these here in the chat. This is sort of the general flow of how these conversations go.
Yes.
Um, okay. Generally speaking, I'm going to start with, tell us about the mission and the vision, right? Like, what are you trying to do in the world with more art? And then shift into what is the work that you do? What are the programs? Like what do you do?
Mhm.
Then and at some point I also like to have you share your story. Like, how did you come to be running the organization? Why are you drawn to this work?
Mhm.
And then what are some examples of impact? What are you excited about in the coming year? And how can
Mhm.
people support you and get involved?
Okay.
Those are the general themes. The other thing that I'll say is this is a conversation.
Mhm.
So it's, there are interviews where people are like, I'm going to ask a question in there, but think of this the way we just talk. Very conversational. It is not live, as you can see,
Yeah.
which means that if for some reason, there's a siren or your computer gets knocked off by your cat, like,
Right.
you can edit all of that out. The last thing I'll say is I am at a WeWork and I picked this great corner
Mhm.
that is quiet, or
Mhm.
was quiet until exactly 12:30. And then I think they're having a lunch break. So just in case what that means, you can't hear it right now, like it's fine, but it means that when I'm not talking, just to be safe, I'm going to keep myself on mute.
On mute. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So to kick us off, I'm going to do the intro separately. So we're going to count down from 10, and then I'm just going to say, hey, Micaela, great to see you.
Okay. Perfect.
Um, okay, so we're going to count down. I do this just so we know where to start the interview. Hey, Micaela, how are you? Welcome.
Thank you so much, Brooke. Thanks for having me.
It's great to talk to you. I'm really excited to explore more art and your work and the incredible work you do with artists. I'd love to start really big picture. What does more art do? What's your mission? What are you guys about in the world?
Well, I'll start by saying that I believe that great art has great power. And art should be available or accessible to everyone. And if you think about the fact that art has great power, then we also have to think about in our times, in our current times, what the responsibility of art is. And that's where we come in as an organization. What we want to do is to harness that power to really address social issues and potentially make an impact towards social justice.
Oh, I love that. I wrote down art has great power. That's so true. I mean, I don't think, we often stop to think about how our views on social issues, how our personal, emotional states are impacted by art. There is such power in art. When you say harness that power, what does that look like for you guys?
So the way we do it is by collaborating with a lot of different people. First, we collaborate with artists, first and foremost, and we collaborate with social service organizations and community members so that we can help we can help create projects that address social issues in a very honest and equitable way, while at the same time respecting the artistic vision of the artist. So you can see us as middlemen or collaborators. We do a lot of talking with everyone. And often that's how projects get developed. It starts with a conversation with an artist. And then we bring this conversation up again with different organizations until we find the perfect vehicle to bring that out into the world. And when I say bring a project to the world, means that we want for the project to have a strong creative and artistic impact, while at the same time being able to be accessed in multiple ways, so that people, if they have questions about a specific issue, they can ask those questions. They can find those
leverage. It helps kick up dialogue.
Exactly. It's never didactic. That's not the way art works either. And that's why I think art is a particularly interesting medium to do that, because it's often experiential and people feel the issue in their bones instead of read about it or learn about it in a more didactic way, which you can do in other,
in other spaces.
Yeah,
it's interesting. You talked about partnering with social service agencies. What are the kinds of issues that you might work on with, say, an institution or a government institution or a social service agency?
So depending on what the artist is interested in exploring or has been exploring, then we reach out to different types of organizations. Just to give you an example on the latest project that we are working on currently, this is with artist Fred Wilson, and we've been collaborating with the Center for Court Innovation.
I love them. Absolutely.
Oh, okay. So because this project has to do with the concept of gates and barriers, it's actually powerful sculpture that's going to open in downtown Brooklyn, right in front of the Kings County Supreme Court.
Oh, yes. That's right. That's a great location.
In Columbus, a statue of Christopher Columbus and Beecher, was this abolitionist from the 19th century.
It's that big sort of open space with all the courts there. Absolutely.
Right. And so it is a structure made of overlaid ironwork that on from some sides looks like those very elaborate balconies or windows that you see in mansions. And then from other sides, it looks like prison bars. And the project asked the question about what a barrier actually is and how much it is self-imposed and connected to power, the power of deciding whether you're inside those barriers or outside of it. And so we started talking to the Center for Court Innovation because they do an amazing job in trying to formulate alternatives to incarceration.
Yes.
And so we are working, we have been creating a series of workshops for youth from 25-year-old and down about the concept of gates and how often, especially with youth, it is self-imposed and how you potentially can switch the narrative.
What's your perspective? Absolutely.
Exactly. So this is an example, but each project addresses a different issue, and therefore we then collaborate with a different organization. And some organizations we also have collaborated with multiple times over the years, for example.
So I have actually, I work with a lot of arts organizations, interestingly, and we work together in my accelerator program. But this model of sort of bringing art and political and social issues and cultural institutions and young people, sort of all of the different stakeholders and perspectives around an issue together through art strikes me as being sort of powerful and impactful in ways that just displaying art may not be. Is that how the model evolved? Is that sort of the thinking behind the collaboration model?
Yes, absolutely. And I think it goes back to what I said initially, that I think art has a responsibility. And, I don't mean that every artist has to work this way. Absolutely not.
Right.
Obviously, space for a lot of different types of work. But I think also we are living through very complicated times, and artists have the capacity of looking at things in a different way and approaching it in a not linear way. And so it does. I think it's important that artists understand how much they can change perspective on things, and therefore how much they can open up a dialogue that can lead to social change. And it's not that the art will change an issue 100%. It's not that there will, one project will change everything, but it can change the conversation that can lead to that change.
I was just thinking it creates more ways into dialogue. And ultimately dialogue is where real dialogue, intimacy, connecting with people is where you see change happen. I love that. How did you get involved in this work? How did you come to be leading this incredible organization?
Well, I actually founded the organization. At this point, it's almost 20 years ago. But what happened is I grew up with art. I'm Italian originally, so the art I grew up with is more like Renaissance.
Yeah. Very beautiful.
Actually, it's very interesting, especially as I decided to study art in college, and I started studying medieval art. How much actually medieval art resembles what we're doing today. At that time, art was very collaborative. And sometimes there was not even a name of an artist attached to a project. It was more about the project. And yes, it was usually associated with churches, etc., just because that's how society was at the time. But there was actually attempt to intervene in the society of the time and actually bring some kind of new angle of conversation. So that's how it started in my mind.
I never knew that actually about.
Yeah, it's very, especially at that time, it's quite interesting. But when I started working in the arts, initially I thought I would work in a museum, which is that's how it started. I did my graduate work in New York, and then kind of more traditional trajectory. But then there's something that happened. A couple of things. One was I did not feel that everybody felt as comfortable in a museum setting. Especially when we talk about contemporary art. Contemporary art can often be seen as off-putting, intimidating, too intellectual.
Very cerebral,
Very cerebral. Plus, there is a hefty price often to get into a museum. That's the first barrier, talking about barriers. And so that limits the number of people that come into contact with art. And because I really truly believe that art is essential in people's lives, I started thinking about alternatives to bring art outside of those spaces, the designated spaces that or galleries. Galleries are free, but they still are incredibly intimidating. And a lot of people don't feel welcome. So instead, if you encounter something in the streets, you can then choose whether you're interested and you want to stop or continue on. Or maybe you pass the first day, you continue on. The second day, something intrigues you and you stop and look. So that's how it started, coupled with the fact that at that time I was living in Chelsea. And Chelsea changed drastically in the matter of.
I was going to say, Chelsea 20 years ago was undergoing just incredible transformation.
Exactly. And it really happened over like 4 or 5 years. And it became from kind of a working class neighborhood into this place of luxury that was connected to the arts, though, because they were the galleries that brought the transformation. So they also ended up creating a big divide between the existing residents and the newcomers in the big luxury buildings, etc. So at the time, we started as a small association, like a neighborhood association, inviting the artists that were showing the Chelsea Gallery to connect with existing community. And so collaborating with schools and community centers, senior centers, and develop projects together to show in public spaces. So that's how it started. And then gradually we moved beyond that, but we maintained that collaborative attitude.
I love that founding story. I didn't actually know you guys had started as a neighborhood association, but just at the core of what you're doing, this idea of art as a public, as inherently about public spaces and community and bringing people together. Did you find that in those early days that the Chelsea artists were mostly open to this idea of sort of community and collaboration? I think, there's definitely this idea that the artists that show in some of, for those of the listeners who are not in New York, Chelsea, Soho is another area. There are these little spaces of sort of exalted art. And I don't know, I'd wonder if the artists would be as open. Yeah.
Actually, my experience was that artists were pretty open. Maybe not every artist, but also we approached artists who we thought
that's right. Yeah.
could be in line with our way of working. But artists were pretty open, and they liked the fact of trying to create a bit of a connection, or to fill that gap that they had in a way contributed to create unwillingly, obviously.
That's right.
Galleries not always, I would say.
That's a different sort of dynamic.
It's a different story. But artists, for the most part, were very open.
So coming out of the pandemic, we talk about some of the social rifts that were always there, right? That Moreart has engaged with and worked with, but that were really both exacerbated and just illuminated in different ways over the last 2 years. Has your work changed over these last 2 years? Are you finding that the types of conversations you're able to help foster, or the kinds of issues, the kinds of art, what kinds of changes have you seen as a result of this incredibly tumultuous last 2 years?
Yes, I would say that a lot of the conversation has become more urgent. and some of the work has become maybe a little bit more intentional. So we have been working in this way for a long time, so way before the pandemic, and with some of the issues that were then exacerbated during the pandemic. But there has been more focus now. And so for better or for worse, people are paying more attention, and therefore there is also a call for greater accountability, which I think is all a very positive outcome. Yeah. Also, something else is that in the pandemic, we as an organization, like so many others, have started to pay more attention to social media. At the beginning, it was the only outlet that we were left with. And before the pandemic, it's not that we didn't use social media, but we used social media in a very straightforward way to usually announce a project or something. But it was not a space for conversation. Mm-hmm. And we started using that space much more because it actually can be a very interesting space to build community. Yeah. Also for an organization like ours, who does not have a space, and we work in the public space, and we do not have like a museum. So this can be the social media space can be a place for people that are like-minded to come together.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. And I mean, so much of what you're doing is about creating and holding space for dialogue. And I think a lot of, like you said, a lot of organizations over the last 2 years have come to see various social media spaces as actual places for meaningful dialogue, not just sort of, snapshots that come and go. So what is coming for you guys in this coming year as we come out of, hopefully, I think we will continue to come out of the pandemic. I think, a lot of organizations, and we've talked about looking ahead to planning and visioning for your next 20 years. What's coming on the horizon for you guys?
So this year is actually a very rich year, and we're very excited. First of all, we had this big project with Fred Wilson opening in June, but also what's special about this project is that so I was talking about the fact that there are like two quite large boxes made of this ironwork that can look like other, gated community or prison bars. Inside, there are life-size sculptures of sort of African influence sculptures. And the structure itself is locked, so the audience can experience it by just walking around and in between, and will see the sculpture through the mesh. However, the box is open, and we are going to have a series of events that will actually take place inside the box. So where the performance is inside, the audience is outside. So also the performance is partly in view and partly hidden. And we are collaborating, talking always about collaboration with other organizations as well. We're collaborating with different genres, so with music and dance and spoken word, performance. So every month we'll have a chance to present new programs, and everything will be addressing the issue of barriers and gates. And when you think about barriers and gates, it's a very broad issue that it can include so many things, obviously mass incarceration and slavery, but also immigration, and even the pandemic lockdown and social economic barriers and gender barriers.
Absolutely. economics and gender, who's in, who's out, who gets to decide. Absolutely.
Exactly. So this really for us is very exciting, and it will be continue for one full year because it's a year-long project.
It kicks off in June.
Kicks off in June 2022 through June 2023, and then at the same time as this opening, we will launch a new website with an updated identity to kick off a year-long research to work on a new strategic plan in time for our 20th anniversary. So there's
so much coming. This is, I mean, rounding out your first 20 years with just what sounds like this incredibly rich and deep, multi-layered collaboration and dialogue. And I can't think of a better topic to really capture so much of what's in the zeitgeist right now, right? It's broad enough to really bring in all of the different topics you mentioned that are so top of mind for people, and bring us full circle to the beginning, of our conversation, this idea of art having great power. We're all in need of ways back into dialogue with one another right now.
Yes.
And I think, what you've shared is art is that way. Art can be part of that. And you guys are right at the forefront of that. And it's so exciting to hear. I mean, I know a lot about what you're doing, but it's so exciting to share what you're working on. How can people get involved and support your work?
Thanks, Brooke. So there are a couple of different ways. Definitely find us on social media. We talked about this new space. So our handle is always at Moreart NYC, both on Facebook and Instagram, also on Twitter. And we also have a website for people who want to go a little bit more in depth in what we do, which is moreart.org. We have a lot that's starting, so I hope that people will join. And we also have a newsletter that goes out every 2-3 weeks and really addresses some of the issues that we've been talking about. We are spending now the spring addressing small conversation relating to this topic. So we just had last week a conversation about barriers as they are related to policing and incarceration. And then at the beginning of May, if anyone is interested, on May 9th, we'll have another one on immigration and indigenous rights and barriers there. And then on May 24th, one on gender barriers.
Wonderful. And they can learn about these on your website.
Yes. And on our social media.
Social media. Wonderful. Well, as always, Micaela, it is great talking to you. This was just a wonderful highlight of your incredible work. Thank you so much for joining me and sharing it today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Have a great day.
You too.